Manners from Heaven, A Divine Guide to Good Behaviour by Quentin with John Hofsess. Chapter 6, The World of Sex. Opening quotation. Of all the animals on earth, none is so brutish as man when he seeks the delirium of coition. Edward Dahlberg, The Edward Dahlberg Reader. 6 sizzling summer weeks during 1983, when most sensible New Yorkers had departed for breezy beaches or more temperate climes, an intrepid producer in search of miraculous profits or a tax loss, which my spies in the world of high finance tell me is often the same thing, no wonder the economy is shaky, staged a revival of my one-man show entitled How to Make It in the Big Time. Much to my amazement, hundreds of people showed up each week at the Actors Playhouse on 7th Avenue. Such is the drawing power of air conditioning. Reuters News Service, in an article about the show, dubbed me the Powdered Messiah, which, like most journalism, adds false excitement to the facts. Even with my name in lights and my countenance plastered around New York on posters, now peeling, how fleeting is fame, I remain the same, your humble savant. I agreed to be lured out of retirement, but only as a stand-in for Gloria Swanson, who was permanently indisposed. I viewed the show as my glorious swan song, and wanted to call it Crisp's Last Stand. Much of the program, as in the past, consisted of questions and answers. Some of the inquiries I received were trivial, and begged to be sent up. What sign are you? I'm septuagenarian. The more interesting questions contributed to the fieldwork for this book, finding out what situations bother people the most, and determining whether a crisp manner could be of any help. Unsurprisingly, it was sexual relations in the broadest sense that many people reported as being difficult to handle, for when men and women stepped outside traditional roles, they became uneasy. "What does one do about the pounce?" one woman asked. I tilted a neatly penciled eyebrow in surprise. The pounce is what lecherous Robert Lovelace kept springing on poor Clarissa Harlowe. I thought the pounce went out with cads and bounders. As someone who no longer wrestles with the winking cyclops of sex, or need worry about things going hump in the night, my life is now one long sigh of relief. But even if I dwell placidly on a platonic plane, it appears my fellow creatures have their breeches full of itches. The woman explained to me and the rest of the audience that she had had a terrible experience recently. Like many modern women, she had taken a course in self-defense, but then, rather like a government overarmed with nuclear weapons, but deficient in less apocalyptic weaponry, she found herself in a situation where all-out kung fu was clearly not the correct response, and yet stern measures of some kind were needed. "What you want to know," I interjected, "is whether there is a polite alternative to a slap on the face." She described the problem. She had come to know, quite casually and effortlessly, a gentleman who was in his 80s, or seemed to be. She assumed that this would set her free of everything but a quiet twilight relationship. So when he took her out to dinner and invited her back to his place, she said, "That would be nice," with lowered guard. She did not suspect that while her date may have been in his sunset years, this particular sunset was streaked with red rivulets of lust. No sooner did he get her into his lair than he pounced, and the evening ended in an undignified physical struggle. The woman, well preserved and handsome, looked as if she could easily have knocked old Satyr into the intensive ward and 9 months of Medicare. "I was trying to get free," she said, "but I didn't want to break any of his brittle old bones." Older women, and one man testified that they also find the pounce a pressing problem, and that its incidence is increasing. It isn't just men who are sexually predatory, one wan lad complained. You scarcely say hello to a woman these days, and she replies, "Your place or mine." Manners, I tell them, employing the labor-saving device of self-quotation, are a means of getting what we want without appearing to be absolute swine. This means that manners, as I define them, are largely a way of saying no to the demands of other people while still being considerate of their feelings. The reason we say no is because we want to, or have to. The reason we say no sweetly is because we have no wish to injure or alienate other people, some of whom we may want to receive assistance or cooperation from in the future. Rudeness is also a way of trying to get what you want, and in the short run it may work. You abruptly cut in front of another car during rush hour, and sure enough you make it to the next red light 2 seconds ahead of the pack. Congratulations. But rudeness fails as a general policy because a world where everyone feels free to smash and grab, hack and stab, and shout insults is one that is riddled with malfunctions and aggravations. Sex is trickier than most situations we have to deal with because people attach so much importance to being attractive or at least acceptable. If a man tries to press you into playing a game of chess and you refuse, it is unlikely that he will be plunged into depression, try to take his own life or yours, or rush off crying to a therapist. A refusal, however, to pop into bed with him can turn him into a wild beast or a nervous wreck. Saying no to a woman is even more difficult, for hell hath no fury like a woman looking for a new lover. A woman can make a man feel like an oversexed ape if he tries anything, or an emasculated oaf if he doesn't. Small wonder there is so much seething misunderstanding between the sexes. First, I wish to make clear, if it is not already well known, that I am an expert on sex by virtue of my inexperience. I have never regarded sex with the slightest awe or reverence. Of course, I have done most of the things that can be done with the male plumbing system, but my expertise, such as it is based on penetrating insights rather than by penetrating orifices. It is useless to categorize my views as liberal or conservative, as I do not funnel my observations through an ideology. Besides, like all unfettered human beings, I call no pigeonhole home. Ever since the naked civil servant first appeared, I have been interviewed periodically for my views on sex. Most of these interviewers seem to hope that I will say something outrageous. But I am not Oscar Wilde. I simply dive into the straits of confusion and head straight for the white cliffs of the obvious. I have said, sex is a mistake, and sex is the last refuge of the miserable. And then the interviewers go back to their editors clucking that I am an anti-sexual reactionary. This is especially true when my views have been solicited for gay publications. It has been an article of faith among many homosexuals for the past 10 years that the more partners one had in the shortest span of time, the more liberated one was held to be. But now that a modern-day Adam would wear a fig leaf not for modesty, but to conceal his pustules, and homosexuals are dropping like flies from AIDS, my views on human sexuality seem less anachronistic. I maintain that, now that sex is valueless, through repeated deprecations, it is pursued with even greater frenzy. People are doing it more and enjoying it less. If a man has 40 orgasms a week, what can he expect but death on Sunday? Too much ice cream, too much salt, too much of anything can make you ill. Instant sex is a time and labor-saving device, but as leisure and energy are what we now have to excess, this is no recommendation. For flavor, it will never supersede the stuff you had to peel and cook. This is one of the unpleasant truths that the permissive society has brought to light. We are all now dangerously aware that sexual intercourse is a bit of a bore. What kept the divine woman lark going for so many centuries was romance, not the G-spot. Of modern woman, we are forced to admit that custom can stale her infinite availability. To replace romance, we are now offered every possible kind of kinkiness. It is not a satisfactory substitute. What is wrong with pornography is that it is a successful attempt to sell sex for more than it is worth. I have before me an advertisement for an illustrated book entitled Women and Their Pets. The caption reads, "See the effect that young, ripe, and ready women have on this wild collection of turtles, snakes, cats, and even Great Danes, and you will have seen it all. Truly a giant step into a forbidden world where there are no rules. This book, full of color photos of princesses and their pets, $9.95 plus postage, is not offered in some furtively circulated sleaze rag, but in a mainstream mass circulation magazine, Playgirl. Other pages offer feathery doodaws to tickle a lady's fancy, or grotesque rubber instruments that look like a leftover tools from the Spanish Inquisition. I don't, as a rule, have anything to say about dumb animals, but I'm sure it isn't the turtles or the Great Danes that are dashing off to write for the publication, charge card in claw or paw, in order to ogle naked humans. There is even a device, same issue, same magazine, that looks like a stubby cylinder of soft plastic with a hole in it, the name of which, Real Pussy, is a brazen lie. It vibrates, strokes, gets wet, and even squeezes you when you come. Your money back, $39.95 plus tax, if you can tell it from the real thing in the dark. We can now trace the trajectory of the sexual revolution. It begins with a group of academic liberals extravagantly defending a mediocre novel by Mr. D.H. Lawrence in a court of law employing highfalutin speeches about literacy, political and sexual freedom, and it ends in popularizing carnal vulgarity. Hans Solo and his space-age piece of pulsating plastic tail. After I had described this sexual merchandise one night to the audience, one young woman stood up and said, "It's my impression that most men would be perfectly satisfied and better off with a portable vagina. It certainly would be better for them to use a machine than try to turn a woman into something silent and mechanical." The air was charged with ions and eons of rage. The war between the sexes is the only one in which both sides regularly sleep with the enemy. For this reason, that no matter what complaints men may have against women, or women against men, they are likely to reach a tense truce by bedtime. One cannot rely on the gunboat diplomacy of feminists in affairs of the heart. Something much more subtle is needed. I recommend Crisperanto as a means of preserving grace and saving face. First, we must address the issue of seduction, of which the pounce is an abruptly truncated form. We must ask what constitutes good manners for a seducer, and what constitutes good manners for a seducee, willing or unwilling. From an aggressor's point of view, this means how may one invite without coercion. From a victim's point of view, this means how may one refuse without abuse. It is true, alas, that we live in an age where no one can be trusted to behave themselves where sex is concerned. When I was young, a common defense against seductiveness was to pretend that you hadn't heard or understood remarks which were supposed to lead to a sexual encounter, and that was nearly always accepted. You went on blithely talking about something else. But nowadays it is much more difficult to pretend to be innocent, for lasciviousness is ubiquitously advertised. We have dehumanized sex, and then sexualized everything else, from airline travel to soft drinks. The stance of preserving one's virtue by being obtuse no longer works in today's climate of unrestraint, for the chances are your prospective seducer, far from being shy and nervous and willing to take no response to mean no, will turn out to be a sexual evangelist, clutching a copy of the Playboy philosophy under his arm. If you don't appear to hear his lewd suggestions, he will be only too happy to repeat them, and if you don't seem to understand, he will proceed to explain them, for the sexual evangelist believes he has a God-given right to your body, and must save you from your inexperience, naivete, lack of interest, so that you too will become a convert to life's passion play. If you do not mind throwing all caution to the winds and yourself to the wolves, then reading these comments is a waste of time. All that one can ask is that you clean up afterwards. If, however, you wish to honor personal code of who you are, no matter what our outer society, be it puritanical or libertarian, coerces you into believing you ought to be doing and feeling, then ways must be found to preserve your privacy, modesty, and individuality without causing a great war between you and the others. Defensive manners are again the key to survival, and you must anticipate an invitation to seduction, and if you don't wish to accept, head it off at the pass. In short, you must prune the tree of his ardor before it becomes a burning bush. When someone invites you out to dinner, for example, you must be aware, without the knowledge making you cynical, that no man, woman, or child is absolutely safe these days from the long arm and itchy fingers of human lust. It is essential to find out as quickly as possible what someone expects from a relationship before you start to deal with it. It is always disturbing to have to make the transition from whining and dining, dancing and laughing, to suddenly having to say, "Don't do that." It's much harder for women, or rather, it was harder for women, to convey a refusal which the man believes, because in the days when they were still women, as opposed to people, a man expected a woman to resist. He expected to have to wheedle and nag to get past her defenses. It was certainly not generally assumed that when a woman said no, that she meant no, and as a result, both sexes moved towards rape because rape was the only way that a man could get what he wanted. In fact, a man didn't actually know when he was raping a woman or not, because she must say no, only whores said yes, and therefore he made fiercer and fiercer advances until she gave way. Even then she would maintain to the last ditch and beyond the idea that she was an unwilling victim of his appetites. Due to the history of coyness, women have a credibility problem when it comes to refusing sex, and men have a mythological problem in that they see themselves as having to conquer a woman, cross-pollinating their roughness with her refinement. Even today it is usual for the man to make the first suggestion that their relationship be sexual. The woman merely responds. My advice to any woman who wishes to avoid the pounce, that she must try to convey that the answer is no before the question is even asked, requires consummate tact, for she doesn't want to annoy the gentleman who is taking her out by having him think, well, you're taking yourself for granted. Rather, I'm only inviting you out for tea, damn it. In short, you don't want to be in the other awkward position of refusing a proposal that you were never going to get. It only draws attention to your vanity and that you consider yourself a most pounce-worthy object. So we cannot say, I'd love to have dinner with you on a Friday, Roger, but I don't want any funny business afterwards, because that is presumptuous and gratuitously tactless. It seems kind of cute to me. If one does not know Roger well, and wishes merely to test the waters, the same aim of going to dinner but limiting one's availability could be politely accomplished by saying, I'd love to have dinner with you, Roger, but I'm afraid I have to be back home, or somewhere else, by such and such a time, for such and such a reason. If Roger is harboring darker designs for the evening, he may then say, "Oh, another time, perhaps." But if he still insists that meeting for dinner is what he wants, "Well, both of us have to eat sometime that evening, don't we? Might as well get together," then you are in the clear. That seems naive. You have put prospective borders on the situation, and the chance of anything unpleasant happening has been reduced. Most dinner engagements, as in the case of the middle-aged woman and her older gentleman cited earlier, are complicated by the fact that one person pays, usually the man, and a woman then feels compromised when Count Dracula leans over to kiss her. He has, perhaps, picked her up in his car, driven her to some romantic candlelit restaurant, bought her a lovely meal, entertained her agreeably, and then he pounces. He isn't saying baldly that he thinks she can be had for the price of a meal, but he probably expects it to be a mitigating factor should she waver in granting her favors. To get around this, a woman who is going out with an unknown quantity should build herself a hedge against seduction. "How nice of you to invite me. I'd love to go, Geoffrey, but I would like to pay my own way if you don't mind." In accepting an invitation to dine, but weaving into the reply her intention to pay for herself, she will at least demonstrate her independence. Even if he says, "No, I want to take you out," he has got part of the message. If one wants to send a stronger signal, one could say, "I'd love to go to dinner with you, Geoffrey, but it always embarrasses me to be in anyone's debt." Then if he says, "Well, I wouldn't consider you to be in my debt merely because I bought you a dinner," then she's in the clear. He knows he mustn't go back on his word, and if he does pounce, your pre-arrangements make it less insufferable to say, "I thought we'd gone into all that." What I am saying, contrary to tradition, is that it must be the woman who sets the terms of a relationship, and she must do this very early, without actually raising the issue of a man's intentions. This may be done through fables or parables. She may pass along some dreadful story of a man who pounced, and then say, "I do so like being with you, Bob, because you never force yourself on me, whereas some of my other friends are nothing but problems." Having been commended for being a gentleman, Sir Robert is bound to behave gallantly. He may not call again, but at least you have avoided an emotional mess and a hideous physical struggle. By sending a number of clear signals early in the evening, or better still before the date has ever taken place, that indicate what the terms of the meeting are to be, a woman or a man, if he expects to be the object of someone's passionate pursuit, can greatly reduce the number and severity of misunderstandings between the sexes. If asked by her date, "Shall I see you home?" a woman can reply, "How kind of you to offer, but I'd hate to trouble you going all that way because I won't be able to invite you in for some reason." Anything will do as long as she makes this clear before they have departed for her home, not on her doorstep, so that the man is forewarned and is free to make a choice. There is a beautiful moment in a wonderful movie, Queen of the Stardust Ballroom, in which two middle-aged people, portrayed by Maureen Stapleton and Vincent Gardenia, reach the awkward moment of saying goodnight after their first date. She says, "Well, it's been a lovely evening. I've enjoyed myself enormously, but I've got to get up early." And he says, "Oh, please let me stay a little longer." And she replies, "I'm really not ready for that sort of thing." He has carefully not said, "Let's pop into bed," and she has tactfully not said, "No." Their exchange is clearly understood. The words she uses are inspiredly correct. Had she said, "I'm not the kind of person who likes to get involved quickly," which may sound like a very slight variation, she would be implying, "You are just a beast who would pop into bed with anyone, but don't imagine that I have sunk as low as you." In refusing a sexual invitation, one should never take the high road of self-righteousness. Manners demand that we appear to be less than others. "I may be old-fashioned" is always a good line to use. One practically apologizes for having to say no. You must somehow convey that your approach to sex does not permit casual encounters, whilst not reproving your friend for his laid-back laxities. Needless to say, one never resorts to the low blows of casting aspersions upon your friend's physical appearance, or his lack of desirability in your eyes. The whole point to taking a serious interest in manners is that we want to find ways of preserving our self-respect and the self-respect of others. A line like, "Me go to bed with you, are you kidding?" is as ill-mannered as the pounce itself. One should never introduce a sexual element into a relationship if none is intended. If you do, and it works, you cannot claim to be surprised if someone tries to seduce you. It is ill-mannered to flirt, to promise that which will never be given, and doubly so if you are dressed suggestively. Don't try to say that you had no idea that your scantily clad body might be of interest to the TV repairman. There are even situations where it is ill-mannered to resist seduction. If you have misled someone into thinking that you are available and made frequent allusions to the subject of sex in your manner, dress, and speech, if you have accepted hospitality and other gifts and shown no concern where such generosity might lead, then, instead of struggling and protesting when the pounce comes, you should acknowledge your responsibility and accept the consequences. In most cases, an act of unwelcome sex is no more bother than being vaccinated, so there's no point in going on about it as if it were the fate worse than death. With skill and good manners, you can avoid having to make this sacrifice, but should you find yourself in a compromising situation largely of your own making, you should stop defending your virtue and start worrying about your maturity. It will give you something to think about while the savage pumper bangs away. As to the poor beleaguered seducer, what of him, or her, now that women are joining the army? Can we doctor his bedside manners? No one who is truly well-mannered will attempt to seduce a woman at their first meeting. Ideally, a gentleman would expect to put up with 2 or 3 sexless encounters before saying, "Would you like to come back to my place?" However feeble the excuse that may be given for saying no, a gentleman always accepts it. If a woman says, "I can't invite you in, the place is too untidy," he does not say, "Oh, I love untidiness," because he ought to know damn well what she means. A gentleman doesn't pounce, he glides. If a woman sits on a piece of furniture which permits your sitting beside her, you are free to regard this as an invitation, though not an unequivocal one. If she sits in a chair, you are not really free to sit on the arm. The words, "Surely you would be more comfortable over there," mean "go away," although whether they mean go away forever, or only go away for the time being, you will have to work out later. The pounce is desperate, the glide is calm. The pounce is clumsy with frustration, the glide is airborne with sang-froid. You sit next to a woman, you put your arm along the back of the couch, you compliment her in some physical way, saying how nice she looks this evening. If she moves away, you've had it. If she doesn't move at all, you can pursue the matter a little further. If by chance she moves a bit closer to you, you can break out into a smile inside. When you have actually kissed her and she has not squeaked, run away, or hit you, you may assume that you can proceed further, but with caution. A man should treat a woman's feelings with all the acute respect he would have for nature when shooting the rapids in a wild river. You proceed tentatively in Braille with your seduction, the less said the better. You should have all the tools of your trade discreetly handy. Only in Woody Allen movies is it amusing for a man aspiring to be a woman's lover to run around in boxer shorts trying to find a contraceptive. Later, when the beast with two backs has finished its lowly task, and reverted to its separate selves, and the woman is musing over the mystery of life, and you are contemplating the meaninglessness of existence, whilst the two of you are sharing a post coital cigarette, or if non-smokers, a post-sexual mint, in an effort to boost your blood sugar levels after so much anxiety and strain, as you lie exhausted from the ritual of compulsive excitation and hollow release, you may well wonder if it was all worth it. Even if your mind, in a lucid interval, is skeptical about the current market value of sex, your body will be clamorous for a new round of sensation within 24 hours, and the whole cycle will begin again. Practically every human life consists of a collision between sexual determinism and free will. The life of our bodies keeps us earthbound. There is little dignity to be found here, but there can be this much saving grace. It hardly ever happens that two people want one another equally and simultaneously. Men and women are always at 6s and 7s in their moods and desires. This frequently means that sex is a hostile act. One person gets his way, the other merely complies. Indeed, one could say, as a general rule, men get laid, but women get screwed. Once you perceive sex in this light, that it is not some gift of love you are magnanimously bestowing upon another, but basically a selfish desire of your own that you want gratified, you will be obliged to recognize that your lady friend or gentleman friend is not part of you, even if they agree to share part of life's journey with you, and are certainly not your possession. You have no right to their bodies or anything else. You may only take that which is freely given through diplomatic relations. An imperfect gentleman, which is the most that modern man can aspire to be, as he and we have obviously compromised with the rules of decorum that were upheld in earlier times, at least has the morning after consolation of knowing that he treated a woman like a lady, which may be better than she deserved, but which was no less than what his code of self-respect demanded. When a man or woman is mature enough to realize that there are rewards and satisfactions beyond the brute urgency of orgasms, and the highest satisfaction of all is knowing that you have done your best to treat people well, no matter how they have treated you, then a simple disappointment like striking out in an attempted seduction will no longer seem of much consequence. Besides, when the problem of sex rears its head, there's always a solution at hand. One should never be dependent on others for the quantity of your orgasms, nor the quality, for that matter. When you reach my age, of course, sitting in front of a metaphorical fireplace, in calm reflection of the slapstick tragedy of human life, even the story of Othello seems comic. All that fuss over a handkerchief and a woman. Needless to say, it is always bad manners to murder the one you profess to love. We have barely scratched the soft skin of this subject, but I have dealt with only how a man or woman might better behave than they commonly do the first time that the subject of sex arises. Now we will consider how manners may help us in the longer stretch of an affair or intimate friendship. Any fool knows how to make love troublesome. I propose to show, through the use of good manners, love made easier.